we've got like 15, 20 minutes until there's morning tea to really get it in. But in the meantime, I hope to entertain you a little bit with a couple of stories. And personally, I just started the thought process. So this may look like a Western approach, even still. So bear with me. But I was thinking about this whole thing, and then trying to find images of places in Sydney, how they looked like, and basically how they look now. And the enormous change that, you can do it again, it's more or less the same place. This is a ceremony on Australia Day, but if you look the other way, this is what we built. So it's a bit of, this is what we do. We fix the city in its current systems, and we think to make those systems a little bit more sustainable, that we can solve the real problems. Maybe we need to think a layer beneath that. This is happening in Sydney. It's still hot, traffic jams, mining, pollution, and there's more slides to go. This is Western Sydney. Only a couple of centuries ago, 200 years, 150 years ago. And this is what we built at the moment. Southwestern Sydney, Oran Park. And this is a quote from a newspaper that actually tells us exactly how we live. People live here in a 4-2-2 formula. And in the beginning I thought it's a soccer game, but it's not, because it would be 4-3-3, as you all know. But it's about 4 bedrooms, you have 2 bathrooms and a double garage. So that's the formula that's built there, apart from being huge houses. Everything is there, except the cemetery, because it's not yet necessary, but probably they will build it eventually as well. The biggest Woolworth you can find in Sydney. There's innovative smart city hubs, working hubs, everything you can think of, aged care. You can be born there, and eventually, hopefully, you can die there, but all in the same neighborhood. It's brilliant, but it was like this. And I'm not advocating for getting back to this situation, but this is a complete different look, and we can try to. This is how it looks from the ground. So people actually live there, and they tell us they're really happy. But the impact of these neighborhoods is enormous on the environment. I don't have to explain every detail, but you can see it. Houses from above, black roofs. In summertime, it's 45 degrees in this area. So you can imagine what is inside. It's an air-conditioned house, basically, using a lot of coal-powered energy. Energy bill is getting up for these people because it's getting hotter, so they need to have more. They need more air conditioning. Apart from that, the plot they bought, the land they bought, is maximized. So the house is made as big as possible. So there's hardly any garden. There's hardly any tree in the street. And to go a little bit further, there's hardly any communication with your neighbors. You're this close, but in the morning, because it's so hot, you get in your air-conditioned car. You're never outside. You drive to work 1.5 hours from there to the city center, and you're very lucky when you end up in your air-conditioned office. So my question is, how can we actually let people live like this? It's unbelievable. And this is Sydney, but it's happening in many places, the rest of the world. In Sydney, we are planning to house 1 million people like this. These are the plans made for these areas in Western Sydney. And this is a way of, let's say, a centralized way of thinking, where land ownership dominates the way we build the neighborhoods. And out of a range of research, these neighborhoods are bad for your health. Obese people are dominating these areas. People are stressed. People are violent, hitting their wives up, beating their wives up. They're mentally ill, on average, a little bit more than where you are now. Kids have ADHD and other illnesses, so it is a structural different way of living than in other places. And my question around this is, there's all this proof, and still we are building this kind of neighborhoods. So that's a very strange situation. Because of climate change, for one thing, a new normal will happen. There will be something new. And the question is whether we wait for a big disaster to change, or that we are smart enough as we are and anticipate that future. But it means that we need to design the city in a completely different way than we do so far. And that's a bit of the deadlock we're in. We need to change very fast because climate change is increasingly accelerating. So we need to change very fast, but we're locked in our own thinking. So we stick to the way we think in our old-fashioned systems. Just around the corner over there was a road. They put a whole lot of concrete in it, and then they thought, oh man, we need to put in the pipes. Forgot about it. So they broke it open again and to replace it. So that way of thinking, or of not thinking, basically. And this is a thing, we are always talking about the Anthropocene. And I was, in the lead up to the conference, I was thinking, what is going on here? So you've got a Holocene that's way before, well, not before the Aboriginal people here, but way before human influence. And then humans took over. So it started with believing in all kinds of gods and things. Then there was real religionism, and it ended up in humanism as we are today. During that whole period, we needed people suddenly not to live in harmony with nature. We needed people to work for us in agriculture to provide food for all others. Then we needed more people working in industry to provide the products we all need. And now we need the people to work in service for us to provide us with, not here, we don't have Wi-Fi, but with internet connections. So that's what I call the Anthropocene. It's not about a period that we start talking about now. We need to think about what is coming after this period. And some people say that is a period of dataism. Thinking in algorithms, the very simple, straightforward algorithms before agriculture, before industry and service, led to people that were nothing special other than other organisms living in nature. If algorithms take over in the future, humans are again back to where they belong, just one piece of thing in the whole world. Maybe, I don't know. So that's what I call the algorithm. It's up for grabs. Happy to discuss much more thinking behind it. But just as a start, this is where we are geologically then. So, a bit small maybe, but in the top, after the Anthropocene, there is the data, the age of data we are entering, and that's the algorithm scene. You don't know what's happening in all these laboratories. People are actually, not people, machines are taking over. So be aware when you leave the building. And in the meantime, what's going on in Australia? Well, we just say we don't subscribe to the targets of the Paris Agreement. So there's a little bit of thing that you might think, well, we can do something right, withdraw. And that has all kinds of effects and impact. This is just one of the most recent hurricanes in the United States. Well, everyone knows that. And there's an interesting thing going on. If you start calculating how much sea level rise we will have in the next 100 and 200 years, there's a whole lot to come. So all these hurricanes, and it's from Katrina to Florence and all the other girls in between, only happened in the first 2 centimeters of sea level rise. So the other meter, the other 90% is still to come. And what does that tell us what we can expect about the number of hurricanes and the severeness of hurricanes? Cyclones when we hear, typhoons when you're in Japan, doesn't know. And predicting the future is always very difficult, so I can easily say, well, there's a lot coming, but IPCC actually predicted the future years ago, in 1990, and what happened? Reality is on the top of their predictions. And it's always the same thing. So all the scenarios of IPCC, you probably can throw away 90% of them, but only take the one that's on top, and it's closer to reality than the others. So that's what history shows us. At the same time, talking about energy and the change to renewables, New South Wales, 6.5% is renewable. There's a lot of hydro in it. Most of it is hydro actually, not too much solar, strange enough. In the Netherlands, it's 5% at the moment. So we've got 95% to go. And that brought me to this graph. So these hurricanes are there again. The future sea level rise is getting out of control. And we need to have 95% change, complete change to renewables. So it's a double whammy, I would say. We need to do both at the same time. If you don't do anything, they will be more and more apart. So what's next? We need to, and that's related back a little bit to spatial design, spatial planning. We need to do, I think, 2 things. One, we need to create the flexibility and the space in our systems and our cities and our landscapes to be surprised, to not fill in, to not plan for, to plan for something that is coming that we don't know of. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to think about how we use our resources. Those 2 things, I think, are very, very important. Talking about resilience is also a very interesting phenomenon. When a disruption is, when there is a disaster, take Sandy in New York, it's not before the disaster that people started planning. This whole fantastic project, Rebuild by Design, happened after the disaster. So that's not what I really call resilience. So resilience is, I think, something that is there the moment you need it during the disaster. But in order to have it, you need to act before the disaster, a long time before it. And that's what you might do using a phenomenon called anti-fragility. What happens if there is disaster? If a system is anti-fragile, it grows stronger. If you're interested in that, read the book of Taleb. He wrote a whole book about it. It's very interesting. He applies it to loads of different systems, mainly the economic system, by the way, but very interesting. How can you create a system that grows and becomes stronger the moment it's attacked? For instance, we need to start thinking in different ways. As engineers, we have been engineers for a century, I think, something like that. We think about improbabilities, and the probability is somewhere in the center. And that center, there we focus all our efforts on. So all our finance goes into that center, 67% of all things that happen. The disasters happen at the outside of those graphs. So we don't take that into account, so we basically are ready for a disaster. We can start designing the system and think about what is possible in the future. That's a good step in the right direction. But the more interesting, I think, is to think about what is imaginable. It's not possible, so it never will happen because it's not possible. But we can imagine it, and if we can imagine it, we can start designing a system that can grow stronger when there is a disaster happening, or something bad happening, or there is change, more in general. In our cities, we could actually apply this in 3 different paces. Fast urbanism we can all understand because we build houses, we build parking spaces, we build urban parks everywhere. We know how much you need and we can plan for it, we can calculate it. That's the well-known Western way of thinking probably. Slow urbanism is also a coined term, it's already there, that we need to take into account slow-growing phenomena, functions, ecology, urban agriculture, water systems, etc. They don't grow by themselves like a hard stuff. There's more housing necessary. Okay, we built it. This we need to take care of. We need to make sure that it can grow. And then we need to take into account something that I call suddenism. Something that happens, we don't expect it. Can be a flood, earthquake, whatever. But still, our city or our landscape need to be prepared and deal with that. Maybe grow stronger. But in order to do that, we might need empty places. Because if something happens and there's no place for that something to go to, then it will actually break things down. So instead of in our urban designs, in our building designs, instead of determining into detail how we want to have it, we need to create and include something that can change over time if it's necessary. And the only thing, we don't know what it is. So we need to plan for something that we don't know. But that might actually prevent us from that lock-in that I was talking about earlier. And therefore we need to think in the potentials of a place instead of the things that we want to realize. And that's not very common actually. I thought designers and builders, they think in the potentials, but that's not true. I came to the conclusion we all think in what is the program that we need to realize, and then we realize the program. No, we need to think in the potentials, and if we know the potentials of an area, we can then choose the best and the most sustainable solution in harmony with the environment. That's a different mindset. And therefore, my pledge would be to include redundancy in all our plans that we make at different scales. Then coincidences happen, then change can happen, it can be accommodated because there is flexibility and space for new elements that can be integrated in the future of the city. So how do we find these? We need to be able to map them, and this is just mapping redundancy and potentials and voids and everything. So we can think about all the elements that we have, from the sun to the soil and everything in between. Where are the potentials? What is the specific local potential for that specific theme? And then build our regional designs, our global designs, until our buildings and houses on that. Two little examples. This is Sydney. For those of you who are not from Sydney, this is a quite interesting regional vision how Sydney will grow. In the blue, that's where we are now. It's beautiful. Opera House, Harbour Bridge, nice breeze in summer. Most expensive houses. People call it the place where they smash avocados on toast. Also, there is the latte line, so Western is no latte, drink latte. So that's what people see as the place that people from outside know as Sydney. Second city is around Parramatta, and Parramatta is the old capital. So when the settlers came, that was the first place they landed. That needs to have a whole renewal. So that is an intensification. You can see towers being built there at the moment. And the third city is in Western Sydney. There is nothing yet, and there will be a new airport, and there will be new people there, around 1 million. And there will be logistics, loads of logistics around the airport. This is how the landscape looks like. And my take on this is that we should put landscape first instead of roads, amounts of people, airports, and other infrastructure. There's up to 90 meters difference in this area. So there's hills. In the Netherlands, there's 1/3 of the highest point of the country, including below sea level. So that's quite a thing. It's quite interesting horrible to cycle, but for the rest it's great. There's fantastic ecology there. There's water systems that are not fitting into the landscape system at the moment. Sometimes it's flooding 9 meters, then there is an enormous drought for a long time. The soil is very fertile and very good for agriculture. But as I said, it's hot, 47 degrees in summer. It can flood up to 9 meters in the water system, and there's risk for bushfires as well because of the heat coming from over the mountains, coming from the desert. So not a very good starting point actually for making the city. So what could we do to create good urbanism here? Make it diverse in housing types, in people, etc. Make it equitable, so accessible for people of all sorts. Sustainable, we talk about that over 2 days long, we talk about sustainability. Functional, beautiful, and circular, so close the cycles, all the resources. But we need to take into account time. Make it in a way that emerging developments can happen, that the city can adapt to this change and can anticipate something that is happening in the future. What happens if we would make this whole region zero carbon? We did an exercise with the students and with Andy van der Dobbelsteen a year ago, more than a year ago already. And it's very interesting, after we did the study, the regional government found out that this was actually the #1 concern of the people in metropolitan Sydney. So energy was a key concern, renewable energy. How can we actually make it? This comes from the resilience report just released a couple of months ago. Quite interesting that the people of Sydney actually want it. Politicians do want you to believe that it's not the case, but it is. So there's loads of emissions at the moment, and at the same time there's what I always call solar desert. So we don't have any solar PV installed in Sydney. It's completely white. Occasionally you see something, and that's interesting because this map, this green map over here, that's the potential. Talking about potentials, the potential for solar energy. It's better than Saudi Arabia. So we can do everything. You put some stupid thing on your roof, and it is effective. Anyway, we found all the potentials for wind, for hydro, solar, biomass, etc., and water. So that is put together in a master plan. What can you do to make Sydney functioning as a zero carbon region? So one thing is showing that it is possible. Based on the potentials in this area, we can actually show that we can do it. But then all kinds of other mystical things will happen why it is not happening. One thing is the price of things. Coal is still cheaper. That's what people, again, want to make you believe it's true. If you look at it, solar is actually cheaper than coal already, and is going down in price as well. The other thing is public acceptance of this new future. Banning plastic bags took around almost 30 years to be effectuated. From the first statement in 1989 until it is actually executed by law, I think, at the moment in New South Wales. Still people love their plastic bags in Australia. And the other thing is politics. And people say, well, sometimes call it a climate chaos in Australia. By every new prime minister there is a new policy, and it's never comprehensive. And it will never be continuous. And the interesting thing in this graph is that in the period there was a carbon price in the period of Julia Gillard and a little bit of Kepler, sorry, actually the emissions dropped. So there is a strong relationship proven by this relationship. So when do these stars align? So you need to have all the things together. So the price needs to be right. People need to accept it. Need to be technically capable of change, and the political climate chaos need to be positive. Also be positive, of course. So we did some primary, some little research, and around 2040 we can do it. So it's fine. 2040 can be zero carbon. So last example, and then it's time for the morning tea. Sydney Barrier Reef. Now you think it was a Great Barrier Reef? Yeah, that's true. The Great Barrier Reef looked like this, and in the meantime, the last 3-4 years, it is bleaching. So if you look at it, this is the actually the area where it is bleaching. And this is how it looks like down there. Not a very pretty look, and especially not for the corals themselves, because they basically die off. And that happens because of two things. One of them is the temperature that is rising, and partly because of that, the acidity of the ocean. And that temperature is moving downwards along the coast, so it's coming to Sydney. So if you think about that, this is one effect, by the way, in 2017 in Queensland, devastating cyclone, and this is a couple of years ago, Bondi Beach in Sydney. It's not even called cyclone; it's just a storm. But this is, of course, the other element that's happening. And the third element, we don't need these oil rigs anymore. So 1, 2, 3, this is a perfect place for coral to grow, because the temperature of our oceans here is getting better and better for coral. We don't need these oil rigs anymore, so we might actually use them to build something coral can grow on. And it may protect the coast for all these cyclones that move along with the climate system more to the south. And it sounds all like fantasy, but it's not. This is a guy from the United States. He's actually growing coral very fast, puts it on the bottom of the sea, and then a natural coral will actually grow very, very rapidly. And these tropical fish and the corals are already here. So you probably don't know, but in front of the coast, in Manly Head, they discovered, this is an academic publication, so it's true. They found, not Nemo yet, but he will come as well, but they found tropical fish and coral just in front of the coast. It means that the climate conditions here now are ideal for growing coral. I hope this works, I'm not sure. Yeah, this is how it looks like. And don't think small, it's 200 kilometers. Not a little thing, doesn't work. Think big. Easy. And sponsored by, and it's quite interesting because it's normally the newspaper that is not very supportive of climate change. And, but I found this idea so interesting that they actually made this movie for me. So I thought it was quite interesting. So that is what I wanted to tell you at the start. It is, again, a bit of a Western view probably on sustainability still, but some food for thought for the rest of the conference. And yeah, everyone enjoys. Thank you very much.